Hi, this is Dr. Jim Porter, and today I'm going to talk about mental health topics again. And when you are having mental health problems, when you're feeling sad, depressed, when you've got problems that you just can't understand, they seem to come from within you, or they have something to do with your family, friends, or your life, or your satisfaction in general, and you feel like you're some kind of pain or whatever, go to a therapist. Go to a therapist. By all means, go to a therapist. I'm a therapist. Of course, I recommend going to a therapist, but I believe you're going to have to do a lot more than just go to a therapist to try to find more and more relief from your mental health problems and the mental health problems of those around you. Hi, today we're going to talk about income inequality. Income inequality is correlated with mental health problems. Income inequality in a country or a population predicts mental health problems better than does poverty in a country. So you've got very poor countries, but you've also got, say, rich countries with a lot of income inequality. In these countries, people are sicker, people are committing more crimes, people are doing more drugs, people are getting more divorces, people are feeling more depression, people are committing more suicides. Now, an explanation for that is because income and wealth inequality create power inequality. And power inequality means that those that are not on top, now real income inequality means those that are not on top are not a little bit below the people on top. They're at the bottom, and there's almost no middle, hardly anybody's in the middle. And what that means is everybody that's not on top has no power to do anything about policy in the government and about how work works, how jobs work, how employment works, and how the laws work. Because after a while, the votes of the people down here don't count. And not only that, because of that, terms are dictated by the people who have the money and power to be the huge employers. They're the same people who are able to influence politicians the most. And so what does that what happens there? What happens there is that the laws change so that there are fewer regulations preventing things at work from happening to the workers that used to be preventable through regulations and things like that. So there's less safety, there are fewer human rights at work, there's something called unions and being able to strike and demand terms, and that's because all it means is that workers get together and they go to the leaders or the people that own the companies and they negotiate as a group as opposed to individuals. In some countries, in some states in the United States, that's not really permitted because you can't strike. So there's nothing you can really hold over an employer, but there's something that employers can hold over you. Now, employers aren't bad people. It's just that we can't see each other's point of view. So the only way to make things fair is to actually be able to sit down together on an equal basis and dialogue about it. But that kind of dialogue can't happen because employers are too busy worrying about how to increase the bottom line, because that is the important thing. According to certain systems of economy, employers, it's a moral ethic requiring them to just do whatever it takes to increase the bottom line. And working with employees has become less and less important because certain policies have made it less important. For example, employees can be considered just another material or tool at the workplace that can be discarded once it's no longer necessary. And an employer who wants to increase their bottom line needs to make more tools less necessary so they can save more money and buy fewer tools. If a human being becomes a tool as opposed to an equal, then that means that an employer's job is to actually find out how to decrease employees and put them out of the business. So one actually interesting phenomenon that has happened in policies is a long time ago, when I was a kid, very, very rich people used to pay 70% or more in taxes, and everybody else in America had to pay some reasonable tax amount too. But it was something manageable depending on how much you made. So not everybody was supposed to pay the same percentage, and there were fewer loopholes. But what has happened over time is, well, back then, so all this paid for the government's operations. And so we weren't increasing the government's debt. We weren't doing as much deficit spending. But since we've decreased the amount of tax that wealthier people have had to pay starting with the 80s, that increases the tax burden of the people down below, because whatever we pay for is all that the government's going to have. Now, to tell the truth, legally, the very wealthy have a pretty high tax rate, not high compared to 70%, but like 35%. However, when you have that amount of money, you have the ability to shrink that down via clever accounting that will decrease what's called your taxable income. So somebody that makes a lot more income than you has the power to make it look like they make a lot less taxable income than you. And you may or may not have the time to do that. So then, as that happened, the government had to use what little money it had to pay the bills it could, and then to borrow the rest to pay the bills. Now, from whom does it borrow that money? The very wealthy, who used to pay the government money 70% of their taxable income to be able to fund the nation. And the nation was funded very, very well that way, so that things that we all needed could be paid through the government just to be acquired and built in general for the well-being of the entire population. But now there's not enough money to do that. And the people that used to help pay that from the top now don't help pay as much, which you can't blame them for trying, of course, but they've succeeded so well that now the government has to borrow money from them. And when the government borrows money from them, they can't lose money. The government must pay them back plus interest. So after a while, the government isn't collecting taxes up here, but they're paying interest up here, and they're only getting a little bit of money from us. So what happens is the original money we borrowed, we're not paying back. The government is just paying interest on that more and more. So the money you pay is not going to fund government resources anymore. It's going straight back to the corporations. Your taxes are going from the government straight back to the corporations just to pay the corporation's interest. And what that ultimately means is that the government is paying the corporations money basically for nothing. And the resources that the government has and the ability the government has to get you what you want and the general population of America what they want is shrinking. They're getting less and less, and they're taking your money and paying it to the corporations to make them richer and richer and richer. And your dollar has been shrinking since I think the 70s or 80s, so it's buying less and less, and your paychecks have not been going up in any meaningful way to make up for that. So effectively, you're making a lot less than you used to. And of course, you're not allowed to dictate terms at work, so you're working harder and harder than ever. Most Americans work harder than they did in the 70s and basically have less purchasing power because of that. So what does that mean? That means that you're more stressed, you have less ability to do anything when you have time off, you have less time off, you have less that you can offer to your children, you have problems acquiring basic necessities that used to never be a thing. At the same time, though, we feel like we're scrambling to get something to feel good about ourselves. And what's primary for human beings is our position in the social ladder. Now, if we're all so lowered that this becomes unreachable, we're forced to compete with each other. For jobs, that's a biggie, because then we become each other's enemies. We become our neighbor's enemies. But not only that, we're forced to compete with each other for whatever social status there is room for down here on these bottom rungs of the ladder. The middle rungs, they're not there anymore. There's just some top rungs and then some lower rungs on the economic ladder. And we're fighting each other for it. And I've got some things just in case I forget what I wanted to say. And we're doing that instead of negotiating for better things at work. Now, that doesn't mean we can't. That means if we stopped scrambling against each other, we could actually unite and agree on what we all need down here on this part of the ladder, and we would be able to amass enough numbers that we could force some power into the situation, and including voting in an organized way. And you've seen it recently. Back a while ago, the Tea Party made huge changes in the government. And recently, the Justice Democrats are making huge changes in the political sphere. This is what happens when people unite on some ideas to get some power back that has slowly been sifted away from us. We can actually stand on each other's shoulders and grab some of that power back and spread it all around, so that no one feels like they're on the bottom, because that's what happens when when too many people are on the bottom. We start scrambling not to be the bottom most, because that feels like the worst. So status is something we just obsess about nowadays. And then what happens when we obsess about status? We pay for stuff that doesn't really make our lives better, but it makes it look like we have higher status. And so everybody is creating this phony sense of higher status against each other, not on purpose, just so we can feel like we can live up to our friends and neighbors. That's all we're trying to do, but we're intimidated by how amazing their lives look. So we spend money making our lives look amazing, and we spend time doing that, and energy and effort. And everybody's just intimidated by what they see at the same time. So we're feeling lower and lower, working harder and harder, and making less and less, and then having less time to go out there and take care of our resources. But then we start to get afraid of each other, and that's very scary. And then some of us feel extremely trapped. And I'm seeing more and more trapped people who are isolating themselves coming into my practice. Now, another thing is, instead of negotiating with the people who have the power to give us more, we tend to argue with each other. We argue with the people who cannot fire us. Now, our families can fire us in a sense, but they can't fire us from a job that pays us money. And that's scary, the idea of being fired from a job that gives you money. And what does a job also give you? It gives you status. So again, this isn't some evil, nefarious plot of evil people. This is just human nature gone awry. When very powerful people have more power than the government has, those people who vote, they can vote people in and out of government, but they can't vote people in and out of hyper wealth. Unless we get together, you can make it so the government has the power through law enforcement to help create more wealth equality. I think that's basically all I have on that. In summary, wealth inequality and income inequality create a lot more stress and a lot fewer resources, and a disintegration of the camaraderie we have together as American people that causes mistreatment of each other and an inability to get together and do anything that increases our power. And power is very important to human beings. It's one of our basic needs, but so is camaraderie, and above all, most of it, the most important, I think, among all human needs is belonging. But if there's such a difference in power between the people who sort of have the power to make the standards of what is a legitimate human being, pass them down through cultural means like media, law, and work policy, the message we get down below is who gets to be the least worthless, and there's a fight to be the least worthless. So we have to start creating the cultural norms again. And we have to learn to agree on some cultural norms at the place where there's the least power, because when the most people have the least power, all we have is numbers. And when we get together, not only do we have power, but we have that more important thing. We have a feeling that we belong together. And when you sit at your dinner table or in your living room or at your front porch, and you see a lot of people with you whom you share belonging, not even a bad economic situation can get you. Thank you very much.